Hello, my name is Dean. I am 48 years old. I have to just remember that because I had a birthday recently during isolation. It didn't feel like a birthday, but I'm already 48 years old. Try to live 12 years old. We'll see if that keeps going for a while. The body doesn't match up to that, but we keep having fun where we can. And I live here in Melbourne, in Kensington, with my lovely partner Sarah and my beautiful dog Peg. If anyone follows me on Instagram, you've probably seen a lot more of her than anything else that I do in my life. But that's a quick summary of me. I grew up in East Keilor. My parents still live in the same house. It was quite, I really enjoyed growing up there because it was a place that had adventure everywhere. So literally across the road from my house was a train line, and then on the other side of the train line were factories. On the other side of the factories was a big park and valley and river, and then there was a quarry around the corner. There was trestle bridges. There was so much stuff to adventure and get in strife and come home with some sort of injury, some sort of cut, some sort of damage that we'd mum had to look after. And that learning experience from all that was just fantastic. And when I grew up and had an opportunity to drive, they built the ring road, the Western Ring Road in the area, and I was able to get out and hoon around those roads as well when they were building. So, bit of a learning experience in every level of life for me there in East Keilor. I actually had my first car when I was 11 years old, and my dad used to, he was always sort of into cars somewhat. It started way back when he used to drill holes in his exhaust pipe to make it sound louder. Not necessarily to keep in the good books with the neighbours, but he thought it was fun. And then as time went on, when I was about 10 or 11, he was buying cars from the local council, would collect cars off the street that were unregistered or whatever. And then every 6 months they would have an auction, and he would go to those auctions, buy cars for $100 and then, spruce them up a little bit and then sell them for $500 or something, and he went along one day and there was this old Holden, and he said, "Do you want to have a car now? Like you can get it and pull it apart." I think I might have even said to him, "I want to pull a car apart and learn about it." And so we bought this car for $10. And obviously, I'm not the tallest of people now, even though I've fully grown. Back then, I couldn't hardly see over the dashboard, or let alone be able to touch the pedals at the same time as being able to steer the car. And the rules when you bought these cars from the auction was you had to get rid of the car by midday. You would have to have the car out of the lot, and then it was closed up, and that's it, done. So we had to pull it out to the street so then that we could go home. And he just might need to worry about that noise in the background there, Sam.
I might mute myself.
Yeah. So yeah, we had to get the car out into the street, and he told me to sit in the driving seat and steer it. I don't think he realised how far away the pedals were, so I couldn't really push the brakes. And he checked it was in neutral. We grabbed the gear shift, and it was all wobbly and in neutral. And we rolled off. He had his car pulling on with a rope. And the next thing you knew, it jump started because it was actually in gear. The gear shift was so loose and wobbly that it was actually in first gear when we thought it was in neutral. So all of a sudden, I'm driving a car and without being able to reach the pedals properly. And luckily, it was slow enough speed, but I did bump into the back of the dad's car. I did reach the pedals. I kind of was standing on the floor, holding the steering wheel and negotiating my way around that to stand on the brake pedal as well. And that sort of turned into a car that I did pull apart, but we realised it actually drove. So it became something we were going to tidy up a bit and sell. And so I did sell that for about $110, I think it was. I might have made $100 on it, and thought, at 11 years old, I thought I was such an entrepreneur. And I thought, how good is cars? I'm going to make heaps of money out of cars. I realised not too long after that it goes the other way. Cars are just used to take money away from you, not make money for you. So that was my first car that I owned. The first car that I actually owned to drive, that was a little old Toyota Corona, a 1972 model Toyota Corona. It got driven like it just, whatever was broken on it, I just kept driving it. I remember once I was parking it in Moonee Ponds, and I went just to reverse park and then straighten up, and the brakes I was only rolling forward to straighten up in a car spot, but the brakes just went to the floor, and I ran into the car ahead of me into its tow bar. Didn't do any damage to either car, but the guy was sitting in his van in front of me having a coffee, and it went all over him, and he was a bit annoyed at that. But when he realised that the brakes had failed, he understood. The gearbox, it was an automatic transmission, and it had the transmission fluid leaking out of it just like a sieve. It was just fluid coming out every time I'd drive it, and had to just keep topping it up. But I just kept going, and it took us all around. It took us to Sydney, it took us to Adelaide, it took us all over places. So bit of a experience to have a car that you need to actually maintain as much as that. On one occasion, on the way back from Sydney, one of the windscreen wipers didn't work. The actual driving side one didn't work. So I was driving along with a squeegee that we'd procured from a service station, and using that out the window at 100 k's an hour on the Hume Highway to wipe the rain off the windscreen. So they're the fun adventures that you get with your first car, I think. Not everyone gets such a shitbox as a first car, but I certainly did, and I learned a lot about cars that way, and a lot about driving as well. Who taught me to drive? Well, the perception was that my mum and dad taught me to drive, but in my own mind, I was teaching them to drive during that entire time that they were sitting next to me. I was like, I thought I knew everything, and I came to understand that I didn't know everything, but there were certainly times where they would try to tell me something, and I would be like, no, do it this way. Now, some of those things were actually correct, and I know that now, but also some of those things were just me thinking I knew everything, and I didn't know everything at 17 years old. So yeah, my poor mum and dad, they sort of helped me in that regard, but they were put through the ringer with regards to my attitude. Mind you, I did very good on my learner test. I actually got like 97%. And the only reason that they didn't give me 100 is they can't give 100%. They literally said that to me when we got back to after the little drive. They said, look, we can't give 100%. You didn't do anything wrong, but we have to mark down this. They just made up a little deduction of some sort to appease the powers that be. So mum and dad did a good enough job. Another funny story involved in the learning process, though, was my dad, his heritage is Maltese. He's from Malta. And so my surname is Maltese. And one of the first learner instructors that I had, and I only did 2 lessons with a learner instructor. One was with this guy who was Maltese. He I don't know, it just happened that way that he happened to be Maltese that we'd booked in. Not that we searched it out or knew him through a friend or anything. But he recognised the surname as being Maltese. And as soon as I got in the car, he started speaking Maltese to me. I have no idea. I've got no language of Maltese at all. The only word I know is Zop, and that is actually a swear word. So I said, I can't understand. Please just keep it English. Anyway, he kept going Maltese the whole time, and we'd go back into this pidgin English kind of Maltese, half English Maltese sort of discussion, and asking all this stuff about Malta. I had no idea about it. I had never been there. I'd met only Australian Maltese relatives sort of thing, no one from Malta itself. And so that was the one lesson I had with him, and I got out of the car and just never going back to that guy again. And then the only other lesson I had was with some other guy on the morning of my license test, and that was literally the hour before, just to tune up, go into the license, do your test with him sitting in the back seat, and then get him out of the car as quickly as you can so you can go and hoon around the streets. Racing for me came about, I'd already been playing around and having some fun with go-karts and a few friends. At one stage, myself and a couple of friends all had karts, and we'd actually go to the local kart track at Sunshine, and it's a rental kart sort of place. It's an outdoor track. It's quite a good track. But they would, in between sessions, while they were briefing the next session, they would give us that time on the track. So we sort of went there, and we'd have 15 minutes every other half hour sort of thing to punt around, and then they'd flag us in. We had our own little pits on the other side of the track, and so we'd drive around there all day, have a lot of fun doing that, and never did any actual, big racing, go-kart racing events at Todd Road or any of those big clubs. I did do some testing and practice at Todd Road, which was quite enjoyable, such a great track. But then I had an opportunity. I went to my, what do you call it? The 10-year reunion for school. So they had it 10 years after you finish year 12, you get together, and it was really weird. I sort of didn't really want to go because I didn't do year 12. I only finished at year 11 and already went off and got a job. So it was a bit weird. I didn't do year 12, but I still, they all asked me to turn up and go. But also you turn up and you're like, oh, you've got to tell everyone about what job you're doing. And at that stage I was working in the bank, and I was quite successful doing that, but it wasn't an exciting job to talk about. You're not going to walk in with your chest out going, hey, I work in the bank, so it was a bit unusual. But I saw one of my friends there from school who, back in the days of school, on his school books, he used to have pictures of Porsches and BMW M3s and these sort of road cars that were at the time, quite exotic, probably still are quite exotic. Whereas on my school books, I had either skateboarding pictures or hot rods and dragsters and things like that. And I never understood the cars he had on there. I'm like, they're just road cars. Why would you bother with those? But then now, at the point when I'm at this 10-year reunion, my favourite car is an M3. I love Porsches, and I remembered that he's in IT and probably has a bit of coin, so he might even be driving a Porsche now. So I popped on over and, hey, Jamie, what are you driving these days? And it wasn't the first question I asked. I did break the ice a bit before getting to that. And then, what are you driving? And he told me he's driving this old Commodore. And I kind of went, oh, okay. And he sort of realized that I was thinking he was going to have something better. And he goes, I use it to tow my race car. And I was like, boing, I get it. Cool. So he goes, yeah, come on over. We're going to, getting ready for the race event coming up. So come on over to the garage on Saturday and have a look. And so I went over and I looked at the car, the race car, and I'm like, oh, you've got a, dry sump, you've got this, you got that. I knew what I was looking at. And he was like, oh, you actually understand cars. And I go, yeah, I love it. I've been tinkering with them and playing with them forever. And he goes, all right, well, we're racing next weekend, so come to the track and help us out. So I did that, went to the track, helped him out. And that went on for about 6 months, just working with him and building things on the car and pulling things off and replacing things. And then at the time he was in IT at Ansett. Ansett went bust, for those who are old enough to remember. There was an airline that went bust, and he needed to get another job, and he was lucky enough to get a job in motorsport. He went and worked at Glen Seton Racing, which has morphed into Tickford Racing, the current form of it. And when he went there, he was going to be away for half of the race weekends that he was in the state series. He was going to be away with the supercars, so he couldn't do it. And he said to me, would you like to race the car while I'm away, so the car still gets to drive? And I'm like, of course. So I was lucky enough then to have his support and be able to race his car. And I got a chance to race in probably 3 events, I think it was, that year. And he raced the other 3 or thereabouts. So the car was in the series for the whole year. And that was my opportunity to get involved in motorsport. And that was a Ford Escort with a 2-litre naturally aspirated engine. It was a very fast car, actually, and I wish I had known what I know now in terms of driving and that sort of stuff. I would have been able to really get some good results in that car, because it was light but powerful and handled very well. There was a lot of reliability problems with it because it was pretty much hand-built by us, and it was a very fickle car. So every time you took it on track, every time you come back in, you would have to tighten every bolt and replace all these bits and go back out and do it again. And I remember one time getting down to turn 1 at Sandown, downshifting the 3rd gear. And as I'm sort of downshifting, all of a sudden I'm like, why is the gear shift still in my hand? And I'm going through the corner without any gears because the gear shifter is in my hand. And, all of a sudden that's it, race done. The worst part about that was we could fix that shifter, and we did, but we got pulled off from the safety team off the track, and they pulled off on the tow hook. But the front splitter was really quite low, and they pulled us over a curb and up this driveway, and the whole thing just folded and bent. And so then the next thing you know, I've got the whole front of the car was all smashed up for something that wasn't even a crash. It was just a mechanical problem. So it was a pretty fickle car, but very enjoyable car. And Jamie went on to campaign that one a couple of years later to the state championship in the 2-litre sports sedans. So that was good. He was always very competitive in that and right at the front end of that grid. So that was quite enjoyable. And it was a really good entry to motorsport in terms of big cars rather than go-karts, and it was a really fun time to be involved. Sort of, things can just turn out of nowhere if you ask the right question or speak to the right people or show the right passion. I think passion is definitely one part of it. If I had said the same question but turned up the next week at his garage and just said, "Oh, it's red," well, that's great. He wouldn't have had any confidence that I knew anything about cars. And, sort of, yeah, having that passion meant that there was a boundary I'd already crossed, and he could see that. And then that passion kept growing, and being involved in the racing meant that I was even more passionate. And then that kept on going. So I think that's definitely an important part of the equation, is chatting to people, having passion, and keeping in touch and making things happen. Don't wait for them to come to you. He wasn't going to come and knock on my door. I had to keep being involved. So from my racing experience, as I mentioned there, racing in the 2-litre sports sedan in not a full championship. The car did enter the whole championship, but I only got to do 3 rounds. One of those wasn't a part of the championship. Then on and off for a few years, I'd race here and there. Every couple of years, there'd be a race that I'd be able to get in the behind the wheel of something. That's probably one of the biggest disappointments for me in terms of my motor racing, is that I've never raced a whole season of anything. I've never had a car of my own that I can go, right, I'm going to have this car, I'm going to race in this championship, I'm going to race against these people on these tracks, and be able to really give it a proper go. Because whenever you're driving someone else's car, there's always a little bit of trepidation to try to, there's a 1/10 of a second where you're just saving you, making sure everything's as safe as possible. There's a 1/10 of a second not knowing who your competitors are and who's going to dive bomb and who's going to be aggressive and whatever. And there's a 1/10 of a second just knowing whether the car is able to do this at that track or this, little bits and pieces to not be 100% performance-wise. So I've had the opportunity of doing odd races here and there. So the 2-litre sports sedan, BMW E30s, Porsche 944, improved production car, a Porsche Super Cup, and a Carrera Cup car, not in Carrera Cup, but like in sports cars. So that's kind of and MGF was one of the other cars I raced. I think that's a quick summary of the type of cars that I've raced. Obviously, with my job, though, I've had the opportunity to drive a lot of other race cars and other cars on the track, and that's been a good experience as well. But the actual racing has been sporadic in terms of all those other vehicles, and no full championship, but always a lot of fun. So getting into driver training was a little bit unusual. There's also a bit of a story behind it, where I was working at the bank at the time. I was a financial planner. I didn't really enjoy the job that much. It was I was working for one of the big banks, and we just didn't have any resources, and we were given the shittest of customers and things like that. It was just, the bosses are pulling you one way and the customers are pulling you the other way, and there was no reward, no value. No one really cared if you did a good job or not. They just kept wanting to protect their own positions. So it was never a fun place to work. And I knew I loved motorsport. I knew I wanted to get involved in motorsport to some degree. And I remember seeing in one of the motorsport magazines, maybe Autosport or something, there was an ad in there for it was just like a part-time admin position at a driver training group called John Bow Driving, or at the time it was called the John Bow Institute of Driving. And I applied for that. I was kind of at a point where I was willing to give up my full-time job, well-paying and all the rest of it, to go and try something different. And even though it was only a part-time admin job, I thought it's a good opportunity of getting involved in something that's a bit more aligned with my passion. Now, at the time, the guys at John Bow Driving, they appreciated that I put my application in and said, "Thanks very much, but you're well overqualified for this. We really we want just someone to fill in part-time around other jobs they've got, or a family or whatever." So I missed out on that opportunity, and that's fine. I sort of totally understood that. And about 6 months after that, at the Commonwealth Bank were changing their structure, and I was based in the CBD. The CBD had, not long before that, expanded to include North Melbourne, Carlton, Richmond, those little sort of suburbs just around Melbourne. And then they were contracting again and taking those away. Now, I was based right in the CBD, but they put through a bunch of redundancies, and I think maybe about 15 people's positions were made redundant. And they were going to redeploy. They gave you the opportunity of redeploying into another position within the bank and all that sort of stuff. But I saw it as a chance it was a door opening, not a door closing. And I said, yep, okay, see you later, pay me out, and I'm out. And the payout was nice enough that I could have sat on my ass for about 4 years without having to work and still, drawn down the money I'd been given and had the same sort of income that I'd been accustomed to previously. But I thought, that's a silly way to do it. Let's actually have a look at matching up my passion and my career. And I contacted a lot of different people in the motorsport world, had a look at different management roles within race teams and things like that. But my skill set really didn't quite match that at the time. There were some other roles in different parts of the motorsport world, and again, just communicating with my network to see if anything fit. But I also contacted the people at John Bow Driving and went back to them and said, look, now I'm free. I've got no other commitments to another job, and I can do a part-time role. And they said, look, we actually do need someone, because the person that we chose over you to take that job previously is no good. They've actually made quite a lot of errors and created a lot more work than they were meant to. And so for sure, come and have a go at that. And I got to do that. I also was doing some driver training at another organisation called, can't even remember the name of it, but a guy who had gotten a bit dodgy, he wasn't paying bills and all this sort of stuff. I was working for him and didn't realise what position he had put his business in, because it had previously been a fairly strong business in the driver training world. And then they said at John Bow Driving, they said, oh, look, come and instruct with us for a day and have a look how it works and see if you fit in. And I already knew some of the instructors from the other business I was working at. And the next thing you know, 11 years later, I was still there running their business, and it was one of the most successful driver training organisations in Australia at the time. And it got to, I basically started off just with the opportunity to do some admin, and then got into the training side of it, and just grew from there. It didn't take long for me to be running their business and building it up and successfully doing it for 11 years. So, yeah. And then that was about 6 or 7 years ago now, before I moved away from there and started Evolve Driving. And now we're the most successful, I would imagine. We're hopefully looking to be one of the most successful driver training organisations in Australia. So when I'm not driving, which unfortunately is what we're at the moment with COVID, I try to keep active. I'm very physical in that I'm always wanting to do something every day, almost every day. My body's probably not up to every day these days. But cycling is one of the big ones. I do a lot of cycling, and skateboarding. I used to be quite good at skateboarding. I was one of the semi-professional sort of skateboarder here in Australia back in the day. And it's something that it's a big part of my life. I don't do skateboarding as often as I used to, but it's still within my blood every day. So I still skateboard. I do a lot of cycling, do a bit of running. I used to play indoor cricket with a few of my mates, and some volleyball as well. Surprising for my height, but I used to play volleyball, yes. And I think it actually was almost a benefit to some degree, because people would underestimate. They'd see how short I am and think, yeah, he's never going to get over the net. But I did have a pretty good leap on me, and I was able to surprise a lot of people that were probably a bit complacent when they were on the other side of the net trying to spike the ball. But yeah, I always love, I'm so competitive in any regard that I think I just love to play any sort of sport. And the main ones though now currently is definitely cycling. Get out and ride my bike probably 3 times a week, as far as I can get. And these days that's only very short with the COVID restrictions, but certainly when there's no COVID restrictions, you might find me, 200 Ks riding, 100 Ks away, 100 Ks back to get home sort of thing. And I do enjoy it. It's hard to have a different hobby when your hobby's your lifestyle, I suppose, isn't it? So, yeah. I am no good at music, no good at dancing, no good at anything like that. I don't know if I have any other sort of hobbies I've gotten good at YouTube. I've been doing so much YouTube at the moment. I think I've almost clocked it. Um, no, I do a lot of, I enjoy just listening to a lot of podcasts and things that are associated to driver coaching and coaching and mindset sort of stuff. And so when I'm out walking Peg the dog, people will be walking along and talking to me, and I won't even know they're talking to me because I'm just so engrossed in my podcast. So I suppose that's one of my pastimes or other interests or hobbies, I suppose, but that's sort of a little bit linked to my own desire to develop and learn rather than actually be a hobby. So I don't know. I couldn't really say if there's another hobby. We did touch on it. Yeah, I was working at the Commonwealth Bank. Now, I mentioned earlier also about skateboarding. I was quite good at skateboarding and had some sponsors and things like that. So when I was 17, I was doing pretty well and doing demos here and there, getting paid to go and do demos and skating in competitions and things. And I wanted to leave school and get a job so I can get some money and go over to the States and have a go at skateboarding over there. And during that year, I was going to work for a year and then go over. During that year, two things happened. One was I injured my knee, so that was a little bit of a impact upon what I could do skateboarding wise. But also the skateboarding industry shrunk a little bit and was definitely getting a little bit more difficult to succeed in from a professional perspective. So I thought going to the States was not quite the right time for that. And so I continued working in the bank. I still kept skateboarding and doing comps and all that, being involved in demos and comps and things, setting those up and working with sponsors, which was an enjoyable part as well. And I've still got some very good connections from that side of things behind the scenes in sponsorship and people that I can still, call up and get some hookups for different products nowadays. So that's a nice thing to be able to have that. So, but because that ended that first year of working at the bank where I was going to just do it for a year and get money and go away, I couldn't really see that being successful because of my injury on my knee and the industry being a bit smaller. So I ended up staying at the bank, and I was good at what I was doing at the bank. So I'd moved through all the different jobs within the branch and the sort of jobs that revolved in the bank at the time. And they kept promoting me and giving me new roles and more money and all the rest of it. And, I went through and managed investment manager and branch manager. And then I was put into the CBD district and I looked after a couple of branches for their investment portfolios and all sorts of stuff. And it sort of, just became something that I did. Probably around about 7 or 8 years into the bank thing. And I was really starting to get a bit jack of it because the progression was slowing down a little bit. You're getting closer to the top. It's harder to make those jumps anymore. There's less positions to move to. But also I think that's when things were changing in the world with more technology and email and mobile phones and things like that. And the bank just wasn't keeping up to speed with that. They were really quite archaic in a lot of ways, and I got a little bit jack of it. So, that's sort of what I was doing before driver training was skateboarding, and then the bank. The bank was still fun though. There was still some good times there. I mean, I remember one of my friends who is an artist, and he would go out on a Thursday night to nightclub in the city. Sometimes I'd go out and I'd always go home early. He would always come in on Friday afternoon, and I'd always have an appointment blocked out in my book there, and Paulie Turner would turn up. He would we'd sit in the office and he would tell me all about Thursday night, what else had happened and what he'd got up to. And there was always some crazy stories there. He would always scribble out some artwork for me, and I've actually still got it in my roof now in the storage, the Paul Turner file. And there's some pretty crazy stuff. And the bank would close, he'd still be in there, we would be messing around, and everyone would go home and we would just be running amok in the bank, just, doing crazy stuff, skateboarding in the bank and all that sort of stuff. So there were still some fun times at the bank, but they certainly weren't bank operation related, the fun stuff. I actually was there just last year. I was over in Indonesia, in Jakarta. It was a good opportunity actually that came up, and I was taken over there to help coach and train the sort of like a bunch of different security divisions within the Australian Defence Force slash the Australian Embassy. They kind of share resources, they work together. And they looked after us quite well. We had good accommodation there at the embassy, which in fact is one of the biggest embassies that Australia has worldwide. So it was really good setup there. And we had a pretty crappy area to drive in, but there's a racetrack out there in Jakarta that we'd go to each day. And we were driving these big armoured four-wheel drives. And they had 4 different types. A couple of them were really crappy and literally could hardly get up to 60 k's an hour. And some others were newer and better. So we were driving and teaching these guys in over a whole week over there, and it was a really good experience to be able to do that. I haven't done any other coaching in other countries. I've been over to the States, but I didn't get to coach over there. I've been to Tassie. It's kind of almost its own country these days. They're separating themselves away from Victoria as quickly as they can. So yeah, that's the only other way I've done overseas coaching. I've done some online stuff for overseas drivers. Kind of a funny fail story in that back to the skateboarding days, because I was probably one of the only guys that had a proper job and had money, we would do all sorts of tours interstate, and we were going across to Adelaide one weekend, a long weekend, and the process would normally be that I would get a rental car from the city. So just after work, I'd go into the rental joint, get a car, drive it home, pack the car, hit the road, and we would drive across to Adelaide or up to Sydney or wherever we were heading. And on this occasion, we were going to Adelaide, and I left the city in the rental car. It was a Commodore wagon. We got the wagon to fit a bunch of stuff in. And I was going through the roundabout, incidentally, just up the road from where I live now at Epsom Road, and it was wet. Went around the roundabout, and I was having a bit of fun getting it sideways and drifting through the corner. Come out of the corner, I looked down the hill, and there was some police in the side street with the radar gun pointing up the road. And I went, oh shit. So I just simply pulled over. I didn't even bother to keep on driving. I knew they'd got me because their headlights had popped on by that stage, and they pulled up and they said, thanks for not being a dick and trying to drive off. Here's a fine. And I got a speeding fine right then and there. Luckily, they didn't see the drifting bit just before that. So I got just the speeding fine. And I was happy to cop that because I deserved it, and it was cheaper than getting the other fine as well for the hoon driving. So that got stuck up on the dashboard, reminder of the whole weekend that we had a speeding ticket already. Headed across to Adelaide. We went nuts over there, had a lot of fun. The car got a little bit of damage somehow going up a curb. We managed to sort of cover up that problem, and the car kept driving. We ended up driving home and having I actually got a speeding ticket on the way over to Adelaide. We're out on the open highway. We're doing 120 in the 110 zone or something silly like that, and got a speeding ticket. So there's number 2 up on the dash. Before we came home, one of my friends in Adelaide, I thought it would be funny to get fruit and vegetables and put them in every crack and orifice on the car, under the windscreen wipers, in the grill, wherever he could, in the exhaust pipe, whatever. There was just all this fruit and veg everywhere in the car. And on the way home, we were heading home and had to get this rental car back in time. And so we needed to make up some time. So kept on the foot in it, and 140 k's an hour or something like that on the highway coming home. No one out. It was 2 a.m. And a car going the other way. I see it put its brake lights on in the mirror, and I see it do like a handbrake turn in the mirror, and I see it come flying up behind us. And I'm like, no, here's the speeding ticket number 3. And sure enough, they pulled us over, gave us a speeding ticket. They put the limit down a little bit lower so we didn't get a loss of license speeding. They didn't realise the other 2 tickets that I'd had. Lucky they didn't look in the dashboard. And I think one of the benefits of all this fruit and veg that my friend had left over the car was that they saw all this fruit and veg everywhere, and they're like, did you drive through the market before you came here or what? And that took their attention away from looking on the dashboard and seeing these other 2 speeding tickets from the previous 2 days. So 3 speeding tickets in one weekend, and a car with fruit and veg all over it, and 4 skateboard kids being idiots in there. That's probably one of the other fails. It was kind of a positive fail because it was a hell of a lot of fun. Yeah, our skate tours were pretty hectic. There was always some story that came out of them, whether it be, yeah, no, I can't even go into some of it. Accidents, no. No, I've had a couple of little accidents. Oh, I did have, okay, yeah. One that I did have when, not long after I had my license, I'd borrowed mum's car to drive into the city and go to the footy. And it was on the Tullamarine Freeway heading into town, and there was, we're in the very right-hand lane, and there was some sort of crash up ahead, and we had to slow down, and it was very tight, but I stopped in time, and we had 2 feet between me and the car ahead, and the car behind me stopped in time. We all sort of took a breath, and then the 4th car back didn't stop and hit the next car, and it just pushed us all into each other. And my car, or mum's car, I should say, got hit from both ends, got squeezed in between, and we all got out of the car and stood in the emergency lane on the right-hand side of the freeway there and chatted about what had just happened. And I sort of thought, why didn't I pull up in this emergency lane? I wouldn't have been involved in this crap. Anyway, the cars all got towed away, and I went home, didn't get to go to the footy. Walked in the door, and Mum said, oh, I didn't hear the car come up the driveway. I said, oh, yeah, it's up the road. She goes, what do you mean up the road? Oh, it's in a panel beater's workshop. What are you talking about? Panel beater's workshop. I'm like, oh, yeah, I got in this crash. And she just ripped me. She was like, and she's not like this very much. She's not very harsh at all, but I think she could totally see I was fine, and probably I probably didn't respect it enough to say, hey, Mum, I crashed your car. And I think she might have thought I was disrespectful, so she ripped into me about that, not bringing the car home and having it smashed up, and her not being able to drive around for a couple of weeks. So that was probably the worst accident in regards to the car was quite easily repairable, but the ramifications of it afterwards, going into Mum and telling her car was damaged is never a good thing to have to do. I'm going to have to hide that one. That'll be edited. I have actually, yeah, I have. I've been lucky enough over the years to meet quite a few different personalities, I suppose, from different walks of life, from TV and sporting and all this sort of stuff. So I've done some brand activations, I suppose you'd call it, driver training type brand activations, where we've been involved with footballers and things like that. So Melbourne Storm, there's a bunch of the team from Melbourne Storm that we've done some stuff with back through Suzuki when I did some work with them. Also did I did a bit where I had to actually do the sort of stunt driving for Jason Dunstall. So if you know your AFL football, you'll know that Jason Dunstall is a big, burly, full forward from the 80s. And if you know how big and burly he was, he's 6.5 foot tall and probably weighs 150 kilograms or something. And then you see me trying to stunt double for him at 70 kilograms at, 5.5 foot. It's quite a difference. And they got me to do this. We had to drive a Mazda MX-5, or a Miata, as it's also known in the US, around a Greyhound track. So there's a Greyhound track just near Sandown, actually, where we did this. The connection was that there was a Greyhound that was winning all these races at the time called Miata. And then there was Mazda were sponsoring, and they decided to do the branding of Miata as well. And then is it AFL 360 or one of those Fox footy shows had the Jason Dunstall versus Danny Frawley. And one of the competitions they had was Danny Frawley was going to be, he's into his Greyhounds at the time, and was, okay, I'm going to be, the dog. You be the car, and you have to beat the dog's time around the dirt track. So they got me to drive this MX-5 around the dirt track. It's very tight, the track itself. It's quite easy if there's 6 dogs along the length of the track is quite spread out. But when you've got an MX-5, it's not a lot of space. They said, go out and drive and have a look at what it looks like. And I did that, and I literally did an out lap and an in lap and came back. And then they got me to put Jason Dunstall's footy jumper on, the Hawthorn jumper, put the helmet on, and then lift the seat up so that I looked a bit taller in the seat and stuff like that. And then they wanted me to drive around. And so I did literally an out lap and came back, and they called me back in and said, "Oh, it's all good. We're all done." And I said, "Oh, I haven't set a lap time yet." And they said, "No, it's fine." Now, the dog had already done a lap time before we'd been out, so obviously, so it wasn't going to chomp up the circuit. And then they got me to come back in and said, "Yeah, we've already got you a lap time off you." And I said, "Oh, how did you do that? I haven't done a lap yet." And they said, "Oh, we just did it before when you did the warm-up lap." So my very first lap around this dirt track was the lap that they used, and we lost to the dog. I was really disappointed, and so was Jason Dunstall. He thought he had a professional driver to come and help him win this competition, and ends up being that they rigged it so that the dog was always going to win. So unfortunately, we didn't get that. I did get to go back out and do some what they call B-roll sort of filming, where we were getting the car sideways and all that sort of stuff around the dirt track, and that was quite fun, but also challenging, because they said don't rip up the track too much, but we want the car to be sideways, and then there wasn't much room on the track, so you're like, it was a pretty tough gig. It sounds exciting to go out and skid a car around a track, but sometimes there are quite severe restrictions in terms of achieving that. So that was Jason Dunstall. One of the other ones, there's been a couple. Shane Delia, who the celebrity chef, he's done a few days with us, and still keep in touch with him and visit his restaurant, Maha, and enjoy some meals down there. I think one of the other main ones that would be worth noting was coaching Cadell Evans, and he came out on one of the days, and I looked after him, and he had a Lotus that I think Lotus Australia had given him the car, and coached him and kept in touch with him. I mentioned earlier that I do a lot of cycling, but back then I actually wasn't into cycling, and I knew him as a cyclist. It was before he'd won the Tour de France. It was when he was, I think that last previous year had been 8th at the Tour de France, and he gave me a jersey afterwards. He signed it and gave me a jersey. I've still got that in the cupboard. So then we kept in touch, and I did end up getting a road bike, and I messaged him and said, "Hey, I've got a road bike now, I'd love to go for a ride." So he said, "Yeah, come on." And we went for a ride. Now, I'd only just started riding, and we rode about 80 Ks, I think it was, in distance that day, out from Beach Road out to Patterson Lakes and back. And I was flogging myself and, maybe doing 28 Ks an hour, something pretty average like that. And he was just potting along next to me, having a chat, and people were overtaking us, and looking back on, shit, that's Cadell Evans. He's going so slow. What's going on? He really looked after me that day. I also got a puncture, and I knew how to change a puncture, but he did it for me. And I'm like, wow, that's someone that normally has a team car pull up behind him and change his puncture. He's changing the puncture for me. It's amazing. So, that was quite a special experience to be able to do that. And then I did keep in touch with him for a few years, but we have since sort of separated, haven't been able to keep in touch for the last 5 or so years. That's cool. Things like that have eventuated, not just coaching these people, but also developing friendships, I suppose. That's also nice to be able to break down the barriers of stardom and just be normal people together. Well, not much of a book person. I probably would like to say, though, one of the books that I did read recently was Racing in the Rain. I think it's called Racing in the Rain. And it is a book that has been made into a movie just last year. I think it was released. And it's kind of about a guy and his dog. And the guy is a racing driver, and his dog sort of is along for the ride most of the time with him. And it's really good. It's a bit of a sad ending, but it's also quite good. And it also highlights the trials and tribulations of a racing driver as well. So it's really good. It's got a lot of things that I'm passionate about linked into the one book. So that was good. And it was a gift from someone, again, through cycling, that I met. That just separate sort of story to this, but it is an interesting connection. Was I was at, this is kind of connecting everything together. I was at Skate Warehouse picking up some skate gear, and there was a lady in the Skate Warehouse who, because they got a little shop at the front of the warehouse, and she was from America. And she was in there to buy something for her niece or nephew, and was like, "Oh, I don't know what to get." And the shop owner was like, "Oh, you can get, this or this. Ask him; he'll know all about it. He's a ex-pro skateboarder or whatever." And so she asked me some questions, and told her some products that would be good for the kid. And then, I was like, oh, so what are you doing in Australia? And she told me she was here with her husband, who was there for a conference at the Children's Hospital. And I was like, oh, that's cool, yeah. How come he isn't coming? And she goes, oh, he's off cycling. I said, oh, cool, that's good. Did you bring a bike over? She goes, no, he's just hired a bike. And I said, oh, yeah, is it like a proper race bike? And she goes, no, he wants one of those, but he couldn't get one. I said, oh, I could hook that up for him. I've got a friend who's got a spare bike, not able to use it at the moment. And I'll take him for a ride. I'll show him around. So I did. I told her to get him to call me the next day, and we organised a bike. We hooked up and gave him the bike to ride. He came for a ride with us, and he loved it. It was, a really good experience. And it's one of those things when you travel somewhere, when you get a chance to connect with the locals, that experience is so much better than if you're just doing a tourist type experience. And he loved it. We, took him out for a coffee afterwards and all that sort of stuff. He really got to feel what it was like to go cycling here in Melbourne. And then about a month later, this book arrived, Racing in the Rain. Because obviously while we were cycling, we were talking about what I do. And he thought this was a perfect gift for me, and, thanking for the use of the bike and the tour and stuff like that. So it's really cool. That book was not only a very good book, but it's also got some meaning. It's got a nice sort of story behind it as well. So I do enjoy that. My favourite movie, it's probably a bit boring for most people because it would be a skateboarding movie. And it's not a good movie as such, but it was The Search for Animal Chin, Pal Peralta video from 1987, I think it is. And the reason it's one of my favourites is because it was such an influential part of my life, in terms of that's when I was, 15 years old or whatever, or maybe I was a bit younger even at the time. But it was something that, sort of formed the next 5 years of my life. And that was a pretty influential time in my life. So that would probably be my favourite movie. I don't have any, I don't watch movies very often, like mainstream sort of movies. I'm not into that sort of very much. And yeah, so that would be my favourite movie. I'm quite realistic in regards to my driving career, and it is it doesn't exist anymore in terms of racing. I would like to still be able to have the opportunity to go and do a race here and there like I've done in the past, but definitely just for fun. Maybe in the future there'll be an opportunity to do something a bit more full on, but I'm so focused on everything at Evolve Driving that I really enjoy what I do at Evolve Driving, that the driver coaching is kind of almost more rewarding to some degree. When I go away for a race weekend and I'm coaching a driver, I do enjoy that quite a lot. I certainly miss the driving part of it, but there's a bunch of stuff that if I wanted to really, if I was going to drive, I want to do it properly, and it would take quite a lot of resources and time. I don't want to do it half-assed. Doing it half-assed, I can do that, just having some fun, and to be competitive, I'd really want to do it properly. So driving career-wise is focused on the coaching and continuing to help people to find their sort of maximum and help them to achieve their goals. That's probably the most enjoyable part for me at the moment these days, is the coaching and both combining all of the stuff we can do off track with the things that happen at the events and that whole process. A little bit disappointed at the moment with COVID not being able to do any of these things. And I've really, it's hitting home a lot more every day how much I'm missing what I love. And it's, looking forward, it might be a little bit of time before we can get back to motor racing to the level where I could be a part of the team again as a they're restricting how many people are at events and all that sort of stuff. So it's making it more and more difficult to do what I love going forward. But hopefully we can get to a point where I can get back to coaching and helping people. And that happens at all levels, from club level, state, national, whatever. It's enjoyable to help everyone at different levels and see them achieve their goals. I do like my motivational statements. I sort of tend to gather them all up and sometimes reflect back on them. I do like one from that came from Alex Zanardi, who he raced Formula One. He went from Formula One to IndyCar. Was quite successful at IndyCar, a couple of championships and things like that. Went back to Formula One. His timing when he went to Formula One was never good, and there was always a shitbox car, and unfortunately struggled. Went back to IndyCar. Unfortunately, when he went back to IndyCar, he had an incident where there was a massive crash at a big oval track in Germany, and the car collided with his car and ripped his legs off. Now, he was really lucky to survive because of the blood loss, but he has he missed, his legs are gone now, and he had to live with these stumps, but he still adapted and still went racing. And one of the things he took up when he was in that situation was hand cycling. So it's like, kind of like a mix between a bike and a wheelchair, and he won the world championships and I think maybe Olympic medal in that as well. One of the things he said was, people said, oh, you obviously were very motivated to win the gold medal in your hand cycling. And he was like, no, I actually jumped on my hand cycle, not because I wanted to win a gold medal. I jumped on my hand cycle because I wanted to jump on my hand cycle. I wanted to do it. And that just always reminds me of the fact that you will be successful at something if you enjoy something. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, the success will be there. Now, whether that success is measured in a gold medal or a lap time or just the whole enjoyment of the process of doing what you're doing that you enjoy. I think that's a really great statement and something that I like to remind myself of. And it doesn't matter how people see him in a situation without legs compared to what he was doing beforehand, and they go, oh, now he's got a disability, but he's looked at it as, now I've got a different ability, and has maximised the enjoyment that outlet can do for him. Unfortunately, just recently, about a month ago, he was hit while he was on his hand cycle. He was in a race. It was a bit of an unusual one. He was hit, but he was run over by a truck, and he's in hospital. And just today I saw an update saying that he has been responding to inputs, but it's sad to see that he's been through so many things and has now gone through another issue where his life is in danger again. So it's sad that that's the case, but certainly still a motivating person, and the statement is worth remembering. It's weird to have to talk about yourself, but it's also nice in some ways because you can share the stories and the experience that you've got, and hopefully some people will be able to enjoy what I've talked about. When we were doing one of our road trips, I think we were going to Canberra. So we're in we had a Tarago or something like that, full of skateboarders, and it was like 3-4 in the morning, getting a bit tired while we're driving. So we pulled into the dog at the tucker box, and being idiots like we are, we wanted to get a closer look at the dog in the tucker box. So we drove right up to it. Now, there was a garden bed right around it, and the garden bed had recently been resoiled and stuff like that. So it was we drove up and the car just sunk right into this boggy soil. 4 in the morning, no one around, and the car was totally bogged. And so we had to just decide, we now have to just sleep here and wait till 6 in the morning or something for some trucks to arrive. And we had to wait for someone to turn up that could pull us out. We, sheepishly had to get someone over and say, oh, it was dark, we couldn't see where we were going, and we ended up getting bogged. But really, we were trying to park on top of the tucker box. So that's one of the little stories.
I love it.
There was another one in Adelaide. When the road into Adelaide used to go up over the Eagle's Nest, there's a big sort of windy road that the freeway now cuts through the hill, but it used to go up over the hill, and there was 2 service stations at the top of the hill, and we pulled into one of them to get fuel, and we got our fuel and we pulled over to the side and parked up and just were going to have a sleep because, again, we'd driven all night and it was 6 in the morning and we didn't have anywhere to get to until 8 o'clock or something. So we slept for a couple of hours, and one of my friends had just pulled his sleeping bag out and slept outside next to the car. When we woke up, he was still out there asleep, and went, oh. So we rolled the handbrake off, rolled down to the car park below, the other service station below. We could see him, and he's just laying in the service station in his sleeping bag. And you know, we started to throw little rocks at him, and he finally woke up and realised there's no car around, and he was thinking that we'd left him.